How much history is in front of you right now? Can I stand in one spot and do an entire video about it?
Spoiler alert, the answer is yes.
Let's find out. So I'm at Tottenham Court Road station and I'm going to try this above my head in St Giles Circus. Now I'm willing to bet you haven't heard of St Giles Circus, but I'm also pretty sure that you will have been there.
We're at the junction of Oxford Street and Tottenham Court Road. Tottenham Court Road, you might never have noticed, doesn't go or even vaguely point towards Tottenham, and instead is named after a different area around Euston Station.
Oxford Street, you'll be pleased to hear, does vaguely point towards Oxford.
Although I accept, before anyone comments about it, that that's not why it's called Oxford Street.
And as a long-term fan of them, I'm very pleased to say it's also a Roman road.
Looking at an old map of St Giles Circus, you can see a rectangle sort of butting out into the junction. On the map, it's about there, but I think originally it would have been more over here. This was St Giles Pound, an enclosure for animals, usually cows, which a farmer would drive into the city to sell. Remember, 400 years ago, this is a village and not a claustrophobic collection of pret-a-manges.
Anyway, the Pound also played host to people. Bad people. For there is a murkier side to this patch of ground, like a few spots in this city.
We're talking Smithfield, we're talking Tower Hill,
On certain days you would have found a set of gallows here. Now, I can't find any pictures of it, so I've had to do my own reconstruction, but St Giles Circus would have been one of the principal sites of execution in London, which would attract hundreds of onlookers to witness someone getting hung.
Hanged.
Alright, yeah, hanged. The nearby pubs would even sell you a small bit of the executioner's rope as a kind of souvenir, which sounds a bit strange and unentertaining, but then again, last year's Love Island finale was watched by 4.1 million people. There had emerged a practice here where the condemned would be given a small bowl of ale just prior to their execution, which became known as the St Giles Bowl. And even after executions moved down the road to Tyburn, or what we now call Marble Arch, they would still stop here to get their St Giles Bowl. There's a pub around the corner called the Angel, which some say laterally might have served this bowl, but I can't find any evidence of that, and so I won't talk about it in this video.
But wait, there is more. There used to be a thing called a crossroads burial, where the already deceased person would have a wooden stake driven through their heart, and they would be interred under the crossing of two roads. Now this would happen all over the country, but we know for sure that it happened at St Giles Circus, and that dozens of people would have been buried underneath it over hundreds of years.
This was usually reserved for those deemed not worthy by merit of their actions for proper burial in a cemetery. For example, the murderers who had been brought here to be hung.
Again, hanged.
But also more controversially, those who had killed themselves. Leaving aside the centuries-long mistreatment of people with mental illness, it does seem particularly strange in this instance to then convict them of a crime, drive a shard of wood through their torsos and bury them under the local high street. Then again, this is the city that accidentally created a fatberg in our sewers, dug it up and then put it on display in a museum. Quite right. And now for a lighter piece of trivia. St Giles Circus has one of the highest recorded numbers of pedestrian injuries of any junction in London. Very good. This is taking longer than I envisaged it would. This place is called St Giles Circus because it's in the parish of St Giles, and you can actually see the parish church, St Giles in the Fields, if you squint in the right direction over there. Like St Martin's in the Fields church, these churches were indeed in the fields when they were built, but no longer. So maybe nowadays we should call it St Giles in the City. Except that would be painful. The parish of St Giles was famous during the population increases of the 1800s for being incredibly overcrowded, and it became what was known as a rookery. This was packed to the rafters with tenements and tiny flats. It was dark and smelly. There was crime and poverty at every turn. If the Rookery was here nowadays, I'm sure you'd find an estate agent advertising it as charming and cosy, and they'd be charging about £800 a week. Looking over towards the Dominion Theatre, there was another site of great tragedy. And no, I'm not talking about the inexplicable 12-year run of We Will Rock You, the musical. This is where the Mew and Brothers Brewery sat, producing beer. Lots of beer. Maybe you're like, oi oi, you could never have enough beer. Oh, this is actually cider. Well, try explaining that to the 8 people who died in the beer flood of 1814. No, I'm not joking. What happened is one of the large vats of beer corroded and burst, setting up a chain reaction which destroyed all the other vats of beer, leading to a 15-foot tidal wave of porter ale sweeping through the streets, destroying buildings, flooding basements, and taking lives. The aftermath was equally bizarre. Some of the victims' relatives displayed their corpses in their own homes for money afterwards, presumably because their homes were wrecked and they had to do something. But it led to the unfortunate consequence of one of the floors of the viewings collapsing under the weight of all the visitors, plunging them all into the beer-flooded cellar. Elsewhere, people scooped up the free beer and drunk to their heart's content, leading to the legend that there might have been a 9th victim of the flood who died of associated alcohol poisoning. The owners of the brewery were eventually held to be not responsible, as it was deemed to be due to an act of God and not one of poorly maintained equipment somehow. The area smelled of beer for several months, but it's okay these days. Now it just smells of exhaust fumes and a sense of chronic frustration over Crossrail.
When will you open?
After all this, the government got a bit tired of the St Giles Rookery and demolished it, creating Charing Cross Road, New Oxford Street, and giving us the layout of the area we still have today. They did not do anything, though, about the residents of the Rookery. They were just summarily evicted and were expected to go off and form new slums elsewhere. The property market kicking people further and further out of London is obviously a tale we still tell today.
Nowadays, this spot is pretty rapidly changing.
Centrepoint, oh no, bad angle. Centrepoint was built as a large office tower in 1966, and when it was built, it was one of the tallest buildings in London, although disappointingly it was never the tallest building in the city, which makes it a little bit pointless. Nowadays, it's even less than half the height of the Shard, and so it's now just kind of mildly tall and mildly ugly. It was referenced as such in the thick of it a couple of years ago.
In spite of your desire to create a political Pompidou centre, Mr. Pearson, haven't you created the opposite, Centrepoint? I know everybody sees it looming over them, but nobody has the faintest idea what happens in there.
I think there's some kind of club on the top floor.
And Crossrail, which at the time of filming was supposed to have opened about 5 months ago, and hasn't, has taken a little bit of a wrecking ball to the circus. These giant glass intertemporal portals sit where the old fountains of the Centrepoint development once lay, so that's all changed. Across the road, the Astoria was knocked down, which annoyed quite a lot of people. Since 1927, it had been a cinema and a theatre, a music venue and a nightclub, and now it's just gone. Gone like S Club 7 or the S Club Juniors.
What's not gone is a 300-year-old blacksmith's smithy, not very easy to say, which is somewhere over there, being preserved and moved around whilst construction goes on around it. It'll be one of the few historical buildings left here once the dust settles.
So in a year or two, this is all going to look very, very different. Like if you're watching this video in 2020 or 2021, first of all, I hope you remember just how awful it was living through Brexit. Like, right now, Theresa May is still the Prime Minister, and we still don't know what's going to even happen. And anyway, if you're watching this video then, hopefully this will all be kind of finished. Across the road at the Astoria, NIMAX are planning to open a lovely new theatre, which should be nice. Behind me, Skanska are developing a very ostentatious-looking mixed-use development of restaurants and a gallery and a music venue, and so hopefully that's nice too. But just remember, this is easily the 4th planned redevelopment of this site. Like from the original roads that were struck through here to the demolishment of the Rookery and the building of New Oxford Street and everything else. Then you had the Centrepoint redevelopment, and now again for Crossrail.
And let's not forget, there are plans for Tottenham Court Road to be a Crossrail 2 station. In fact, they've future-proofed its construction in the way they designed this horribly long corridor I generally refuse to walk down.
Seriously, if you ignore the signs that go the wrong way, it's much quicker. So you could say that this video is documenting this brief and important change in the history of St Giles Circus. Or you might not say that, and that's fine too. Anyway, what history is lying in front of you right now? Comment below. Maybe your back garden is an ancient pirate burial ground, or maybe your kitchen is where the first plague victim died. Maybe you live in Croydon. I'm sorry if you do. Anyway, like and subscribe and share the video if you care to, and I'll be back sometime, who knows when. Bye!